Cool, yeah, well, hello everyone, I'm Dave Seaman. I'm going to be, I'm an innovation fellow here at DICE. I'm going to be talking through the second part of this presentation, so hand it over.
Thank you, and my name's Laura Kaur. So Dave and I work together in the innovation team here at DICE, and we'll be presenting on this ongoing project called the Midlands Forest Network, where we've been working with the Woodland Trust and others to apply systematic conservation planning to help inform woodland creation and priorities for woodland creation in the Midlands region of England. So just setting a bit of context, the Midlands Forest Network stretches from the Welsh border on the west to the Lincolnshire coast on the east. So that's a 30,000 kilometre square area. So obviously very large and lots of diversity in there. So for example, you can see the grey areas are some of the biggest, urban areas we have in the country, including Birmingham, Lincoln and other cities. But we also have really wide tracts of rural areas, and that includes some of the most productive agricultural lands in England, so much like Chloe was saying about Oxfordshire. And being so big, we also cross lots of administrative boundaries. So we've got 12 local nature recovery strategy areas within this network. And despite having some of England's largest urban areas, as well as some of its most productive agricultural lands, there are some socioeconomic challenges across the Midlands. So for example, if we think about life expectancy, the average life expectancy in both the East and West Midlands is lower than the national average in England. And looking at the government's indices of multiple deprivation, nearly 25% of the census areas across the Midlands are classified as deprived. So if we look at this map, you can see that there is kind of a different distribution of that across the area. So some of the more deprived areas are on the east coast and also in some of the inner city urban areas. But despite that, the Institute for Fiscal Studies found that government spending is lower in the Midlands compared to the national average. And that's particularly the case in the East Midlands, where that was true for all 5 of the public services that were looked at. And there are also some environmental challenges that are being faced. So not least is flood risk. So you can see on this graph that both the West Midlands and the East Midlands feature in the top 10 regions in England with the highest number of historic flood warnings and alerts. And in particular, the West Midlands is actually the area that has had the highest number of these. And that's something that we're hoping can be alleviated slightly through woodland creation. So zooming more into the biodiversity and habitat context, currently most land use in the Midlands is agricultural. And looking at woodland cover, so this is based on Natural England's Living England dataset. The estimated woodland cover across this area is 9.9%, but again you can see that that's distributed quite unevenly across the region. And if we put that into the context of maybe some national targets, so if we compare it to the government target for 16.5% of tree and woodland cover in England by 2050, if we're thinking about trying to reflect that across the MFN area, that would require a 2,000 kilometre square increase in woodland and tree coverage. And context in terms of other biodiversity away from woodlands, the average designated site coverage in the Midlands is, again, less than the average the coverage in England. So you can see there that's the case of special areas of conservation and SSSIs, and also looking at ancient woodland, which is considered an irreplaceable habitat in this country, that is also far below the national average. And thinking about urban areas, so looking at something called the Tree Equity Score, which the Woodland Trust helped to develop and which Dave will be presenting a bit more on later, we can also see that even in urban areas, there are lots of high priority areas for tree planting across the Midlands. So bringing that all together, the Midlands Forest Network was established with this vision of growing a web of connected woodland habitats across the Midlands. But with that really complex background, this is not only to improve the biodiversity context, but it's also with the aim of trying to meet some interdisciplinary environmental, social and economic goals. So here are just a few of them. Of course, we're looking to create larger, more connected network of woodlands, trees and hedgerows. but that's also to support some ecosystem services such as carbon stores and natural flood management. And through that, really hoping to increase equitability of access to nature and also have some well-being impacts. And looking at the economic case, with the idea of directing more investment into the Midlands region through some of these kind of green finance options. So we're currently in, and I'm sorry, I'm not sure why that's being cut off at the bottom, but we're currently in a 2-year development phase of the Midlands Forest Network, which finishes in October this year. And that's involved some really pertinent, is being led by some really pertinent partners who have already been working in the Midlands, both in terms of woodland directly, but also socioeconomic aspects. So Dave's role, and more recently myself as well, has been working primarily with the Woodland Trust and these other partners in looking at how we can apply systematic conservation planning to help identify priority areas for woodland creation, which will help to meet these interdisciplinary goals. So why systematic conservation planning? We've already had a great background to that. So we've seen that the MFN has this complex context and these really ambitious interdisciplinary goals. And going back to those 3 stages that Bob mentioned earlier, just a few more arrows, we can see that this really allows us to bring in some of that context and a lot of those goals. So for example, a lot of what I've been presenting is around that framing aspect. So we really have to understand the context of the area that we're working in and working with stakeholders as well. Dave will mention a bit more about that. And looking at prioritization, we're not only considering biodiversity data, but we're also bringing in these socioeconomic variables to create a conservation plan, in this case a woodland creation and enhancement plan, which brings in these key principles of connectivity, adequacy, representation and effectiveness. So in short, we're applying SCP here to help us identify priority locations for woodland creation that meet ecological, social and economic targets while minimizing cost. And Dave's going to be drilling into a bit more technical detail on some of these steps. So I'll hand over. Oh, you've got one.
Cool, yeah, thanks, Laura. So yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about the methods, or like how we're applying SCP to the Midlands Forest Network systems. I think it's quite a nice illustration of how flexible the approach can be to your particular situation. Going to be particularly talking about scale and cost, so what scale we're working at and the cost, which I'll talk about shortly. So when we're talking about scale, we're in this sort of framing aspect of the SCP approach, so right at the beginning. Quick bit of background on SCP. Basically, we divide the landscape up into individual planning units. We can measure the amount of species habitats, cost threats within each planning unit. These are then selected to achieve our conservation targets. As Chloe was showing a nice demonstration earlier, it's not the whole planning unit, it's what's within the planning unit. And the size and shape really depends on the goals and the objectives of the particular plan. So as Laura mentioned, the Midlands Forest Network area is massive, it's 30,000 square kilometres. So we wanted to know what scale is most appropriate for planning across the Midlands, and are there any constraints as to how sort of fine scale or coarse we could go. We could go really fine scale, but then it'd be really computationally expensive, take a long time to run the models. If you went too coarse, it wouldn't be very useful. So July last year, we had our first workshop with 30 participants from across the Midlands, from different backgrounds, from local authorities to sort of local nature groups. And one thing that came out from every conversation we had basically was there's this real need or difference of need between urban areas and rural areas in terms of scale and the actual planning. So to kind of try and address this, we're going to use different size planning units, or we are using different size planning units for urban areas and rural areas. So fine scale 5 hectare planning units for the more urban areas and 50 hectare planning units for more rural areas to try and account for these different needs in planning. So the way we did that was use the Office of National Statistics built up areas maps to delineate these built up areas, and we end up with a map that looks like this. So we've got large, coarse, still quite fine scale, but planning units for the most appropriate scale in rural areas, and hopefully same for urban areas. So that's sort of how we're applying or scale to the plan. The next thing is cost, which has been mentioned a few times, and this comes in this sort of data collection phase of the SCP process. So when we're talking about cost, it doesn't have to be monetary cost. Cost can be, they can be monetary costs, so land acquisition prices, can be opportunity costs, so lost development, lost income from agriculture, can be ecological risk. Cost can be many things, and it's a way to balance the trade-offs. So we want to meet our targets, but at the least expensive way. So the cost can have a massive effect on the prioritisation, and it's critical for realism to make these plans more applicable on the ground. So again, we had workshops last August with 32 participants again from across the Midlands to discuss the most appropriate cost to use in our situation. And basically what everyone came to was that the Forestry Commission sensitivity to woodland creation map was a really nice way to include cost within the plan. So if you're not familiar with this map, it shows basically how sensitive land is for woodland creation. So low sensitivity areas should be easy in theory to get planning to create woodlands. Unsuitable areas or high might be difficult, but it doesn't mean it's impossible, it just means it's harder to do. So there are 4 categories, so we've just given these a numeric value at the moment, a linear value 1 to 4. So higher or less suitable areas have a higher cost than more suitable areas. The problem is a lot of Midlands is quite urbanised, quite built up areas, and these maps, we're not interested really in street trees, but we are really interested in fine scale, woodland creation or small areas of woodland, and this map kind of breaks down in those areas for our needs. So as an alternative, we're going to use the tree equity score developed by the Woodland Trust. It's a really nice layer because it shows not only where there is a lack of tree cover, but also where it's most needed in terms of environmental and social sort of aspects. So it's a really nice way to highlight this. The sort of one problem with using this is that it's on a scale from 0 to 100, so it's very different to the land sensitivity map. But luckily, the Woodland Trust and their partners have come up with these classifications in terms of priority for tree planting in terms of the tree equity score. It's a bit counterintuitive, so the highest priority we've given the lowest cost. So those are areas that hopefully will be selected more than areas that have a high tree equity or already have a high level of tree equity, lots of trees and etc. Hopefully that makes sense. A bit counterintuitive. But if we put them together, we get this nice map on the same scale that hopefully takes into account the needs of rural and urban areas in one level. So that's very briefly sort of some of the things we're considering. There's many more aspects going into this map. It's highly complex. So you want to look at connectivity, levels of deprivation. We want this to be as equitable as possible, possibly including some wellbeing measures in there, hopefully, ecosystem services. And then post hoc, one of the things we really want to make happen is, or a way for this to be implemented on the ground. So we're going to try and look at green finance options and investable propositions so that we can prioritise areas for woodland creation, but also hopefully make sure we can pay for it or that they can be paid for. So yeah, not got any results at the moment. We're going through this iterative process at the moment with Mark Sands. We're running lots and lots of iterations, looking at results and adjusting things as necessary. But by September, October, we will have our final prioritisation map, a technical report for anyone who wants to dig into the technicalities of it, and this portfolio of investable propositions to try and hopefully help with the implementation phase. And then we will bundle that all up in a nice ARC story map that will hopefully make it as accessible as possible to make it, have the biggest impact. So yes, I spoke very fast because I had a lot to get through. I think I finished a bit early, but yes, thank you.